Taigi, rugsėjo 4 diena. Turime paskutinę turbūt kelionę su mūsų slyva. Ilgesnė tokia. Vyksime į nacionalinio susivienijimo suvažiavimą. Tai va, tai iksiukas lieka mum. Slyva eina Sandrai. Ir pradėsim kelionę tada į Kėdainį. Užfiksuosim, kaip šita slyvutė lekia. Tikiuosi nesimėtis labai šitas visas reikalas. Reikia gal biškis kojas daugiau nuleisti. O, gal apylygiai. O, manau, kad liuks. Gal biškį dar nuleisime, o taip. Visio. Nu ir ką čardžiai dėl viso ko įkišim, pažiūrėsim, ar čia reikia šitas bajeris ar ne. Nerodo, cholera. Dzin. Taip, ką mes čia klausysim šiandieną važiuodami? Eisim ant kaipgi čia. O, dabar muzika. Nu, girdisi varikliukas. 2.5 120 kW. Lakiam. visiems kvėvai, blėt, veikia. Tai ką, duosim variklio garsą paklausyti, ar dar ko? Kur žinai, kaip čia bus. Duosim variklio garsą paklausyti. Ką, pagnali? Realiai turim palaikyti 100 km greitį, kad spėti tą huinę nuvažiuoti. Atsiprašau, jis susivienijimo sąskaitį. Čia tik tai kelionį fiksuoti pasiimu.
Gerai, tada tai sadykit va šitą eilę mašiną.
Gerai, ačiū. Šitą eilę. Okei. Nu ką, važiuojam. Opa. Ką važiuojam, gerai.
How much and in which direction the incremental substitution takes place depends upon their respective values. These values are wholly subjective. To say that people want more yogurt is to say that yogurt has become more valuable to them. Either statement conveys exactly the same information. There is no objective value of yogurt which could be determined in a chemical laboratory or under a microscope, nor would any political or philosophical process determine what it is really worth. Value being ultimately subjective, it varies not only from person to person, but from time to time with the same person, and varies also according to how much of the given good he already has. Obviously, a man in the desert dying of thirst would sacrifice much more for a glass of water than he would in his home, with water available from his faucet. In short, even for the same individual, the value of water can vary from virtually everything he has down to zero, or even below zero, since he would pay to have water taken away if his basement were flooded. The cost of a given good can be determined in purely physical. cost of a given good can be determined in purely physical terms. If so many gallons of milk are required to produce 10 pounds of yogurt, and if we know how much ice cream could have been produced with that same amount of milk, then we know the physical rate at which ice cream can be transformed into yogurt through incremental substitutions in the production process. However, this statement of physical possibilities says nothing about how much yogurt will in fact be produced relative to ice cream. That depends on the relative values of these goods to their respective consumers. The knowledge of these changing values may be transmitted by price fluctuations in a market economy, or by voting changes in a politically controlled planned economy, or by direct orders in a non-democratic, politically controlled economy, communism, fascism, etc. In other words, while an individual or an economy may appear at first to be weighing the subjective value of a good against its objective cost, ultimately, what is being weighed is the subjective value of one good against the subjective value of another good. Faced with identical technology and resources setting the limits of what is possible at a given time, different combinations of goods may be produced according to the subjective preferences of the decision makers, whether those decision makers are consumers, central planners, or royalty. None of these differing assortments of goods, and therefore different resource uses, need be more efficient than any other. Efficiency in turning inputs into outputs can be measured only after specifying the subjective values involved. Even in the apparently objective physical sciences, this is also the case. The objective efficiency of an automobile engine can be determined only after specifying the subjectively determined goal as the forward movement of the automobile. Otherwise, every engine is 100% efficient in the sense that all the energy input is used, either in the forward motion of the car, overcoming the internal friction of engine parts, or in random shaking of the automobile. Although neither value nor efficiency is wholly objective, the idea that they are dies hard. Denunciations of inefficiency and waste are often nothing more than statements of a different set of preferences. Schemes to turn particular decisions or processes over to experts who will promote scientifically neutral efficiency are often simply ways of allowing one group of people to impose their subjective preferences on others. For example, proposals for a city manager form of government to take municipal decisions out of politics are in reality proposals to make local decision-making responsive to a different set of interests other than the general electorate. The merits of such a change can be debated from various viewpoints in particular cases, but the point here is the inaccuracy of the usual description of what is going on and the misconceptions or dishonesty behind such descriptions. As a mechanism for the utilization of knowledge in society, the city manager arrangement screens out some of the knowledge from the electorate, allowing more weight to the knowledge of others who have greater access to or implicit control over the administration. Average versus incremental costs. When people casually speak of the cost of producing something, they usually mean the average cost. That is, the total cost of running the enterprise divided by the number of units of output it produces. But for actual decision-making purposes at any given time, the incremental cost is more crucial. The total cost of running an airline obviously includes the cost of airplanes, but in deciding whether or not to make a particular flight, what matters at that point is whether the incremental cost of that flight will be covered by its incremental value to the passengers, as revealed by what they are willing to pay for it. This question has to be faced whether the airline is a private company in an unregulated economy, a government-owned enterprise in a socialist state, or any other combination of economic and political institutions. The mechanisms by which the decision is made will be different, and of course the actual decision may be influenced or even determined by the nature of the institutional mechanism. But the point here is that the problem itself is independent of institutions. and institutions can be assessed in terms of how well they resolve the problem. An airplane, which would otherwise remain idle on the ground during a particular time, has a very low cost in the economic sense of cost as a foregone alternative. If a plane that would otherwise remain in a hangar overnight is instead brought out at midnight to fly a party of vacationers to a nearby resort, the cost of this short flight that does not interfere with its other schedule of flights is much less than the average cost of an airplane flight. In this case, the incremental cost of the flight is little more than the cost of fuel and a flight crew, since the plane itself is there for another purpose anyway. In a price-coordinated economy, the amount of payment by the passengers required to induce the airline to fly under these conditions will tend to be much lower than the amount required to induce the same airline to set aside planes to fly the same distance on a regular schedule. For the latter decision, the passengers would have to pay an amount sufficient to cover not only the fuel and flight crew, but to cover also the cost of the plane itself and the airline's various overhead expenses. In an economy coordinated by government decisions, the same economic resolution would be efficient, though it would have to be reached institutionally through a political or administrative process. Whether the same resolution would be reached in fact would depend upon the extent to which the particular institutional arrangements convey the same knowledge of consumer preferences, incremental trade-offs, and production costs, incremental trade-offs, and whether that knowledge was conveyed in a form that was effective in the sense of constituting a personal incentive to the decision maker. It often costs much more to make a commitment in advance to produce a given good or service than it does to produce the same good or service with equipment already provided for other purposes. In some substitutions, incremental costs are less than average costs, sometimes only a tiny fraction of average costs. By the same token, if the existing equipment is already being used at its normal capacity, the additional use may cost even more than the normal use, as in the case of additional demand for electricity at a time when the generators are already straining. The difference between average cost and incremental cost is crucial, not only in economic institutions and various economic systems, but it is also crucial in political, legal, and other systems as well. The incremental cost of a telephone's ringing may be quite low to a resting and slightly bored housewife, but may be maddeningly high to a housewife who is already simultaneously coping with a crying baby, a pot boiling over on the stove, and a fight among her other children. The incremental cost of making certain precedent-setting judicial decisions is not simply the cost of that individual case, but the cost of committing legal institutions to settling similar future cases on a similar basis. This cost may be hundreds or thousands of times as large as the individual decision in itself. Looked at another way, where certain decisions may be made in any of a number of different institutions within a given social system, the institutional location of that decision-making process may raise or lower the costs entailed by large multiples of what is involved in the individual decision as such. Diminishing returns. Instead of looking at the efficiency of an economy in terms of how much input is required per unit of output, that is, the cost of production, we can look at how much output can be obtained from a given input. In both ways, we can see that there is no fixed relationship between input and output, but some general patterns that need to be kept in mind in discussions of economic systems, or even legal, political, and social systems. Generally, the pattern has been that increasing one input while other inputs remain constant usually increases output, at first faster than the one input is increased, then in proportion, then slower, and finally there is an absolute reduction of output when the one input is added in unlimited quantities. The question is why this pattern exists. A lone man farming a vast expanse of land has a limited number of options as to how he will work this land. He may spread his labor thinly all over the whole land area, spending a substantial part of his workday walking over this area instead of actually tilling the soil, Or he may decide that he will get more total output by cultivating only half of the land, putting more intensive labor there and cutting back on the amount of his walking from place to place, letting more of his energy go into the actual cultivation. Which of the two approaches he will use will depend on how the various considerations balance out in the individual case. The point here is merely to illustrate the kinds of options he has as a lone farmer, input, which can be compared to the options when there are two units of the same input, that is, two farmers on the same land. While one farmer could either cultivate the whole land area as one unit or cultivate half the area and leave the other half uncultivated, two farmers have the option of cultivating all the area as a unit or cultivating both halves as separate units. That is, two farmers can either do what one farmer would have done or can, in addition, do things which one farmer could not have done. This is true also in the details of the work. For example, in transporting small objects into an area out in the field, two farmers may choose either to carry them or to throw them to one another. A single farmer has only the first option. In carrying heavy and/or awkward loads, one farmer is limited to getting grips in two places no further apart than the span of his arms. Two farmers working together can get two sets of grips, with each set being much further away than one person's arm span. In short, within a range of work activities, two farmers have all the options available to one farmer, plus some other options as well. How often they will choose to work separately and how often as a team depends upon what the advantages are in practice. The crucial point, however, is that more options generally mean better results, where the larger number of options includes all the smaller number of options. This principle has wide applications within economics and beyond economics, as will be seen in later discussions. In the case of two farmers on a large tract of land, they can each do whatever one farmer could do, and together they can do things that neither could do alone. In the absence of offsetting problems, we would therefore expect two farmers to produce more than twice the output of one farmer on the same ample expanse of land. In short, we may expect a rising output per unit of the input. For similar reasons, we might expect three farmers to also increase output more than in proportion to the increased input, since more elaborate organization of the inputs is now possible. How long the output would increase more than in proportion to the input would depend upon many specific facts, but what is important here is why it could not continue increasing this way forever. Beyond some point, the land would become crowded with people, and their getting into each other's way and distracting one another's attention would begin to offset the organizational advantages. If the two farmers had been sharing the output as partners, they would automatically, and perhaps even without thinking about it, have been monitoring each other's work, reducing the prospects of one's taking it easy at the expense of the other. The ease of monitoring and the certainty of being monitored would guard against the level of effort falling below the two farmers' own best judgments of the balance between ease and output. But when the number of farmers reached 100, no single farmer could equally easily watch the other 99, nor would each farmer be equally sure that his relaxations of effort would be detected by the others. Even if all 100 farmers had identical notions of how much output was worth how much effort, each farmer individually would have an incentive to put forth less than this effort, since his own individual shortcomings would have very little relationship to his own individual share of the output. They might all know, in an abstract sort of way, that the total effort was related to the total output, and so all might desire to keep everyone's performance up to par. But there is a great difference between this desire, even if universally shared, and an organizational way of achieving it. At the very least, devising and maintaining an organized system of monitoring cannot be free, and whether it would repay its cost is an empirical question. Monitoring costs, either the costs of monitoring or the loss of output if not monitored, are an additional factor offsetting the possibilities of rising output per unit of input. The original assumption that larger numbers of people meant additional options without an offsetting loss of other options is only approximately true for small numbers of people. Crowding, distraction, and monitoring costs offset the gains made possible by cooperative organizational work. As more and more inputs are added, beyond some point, the negative factors outweigh the positive advantages, and there is a falling ratio of output to input. This is the law of diminishing returns, a basic economic principle with implications that go far beyond economics. The law of diminishing returns applies to inanimate inputs as well. Although some amount of fertilizer on the land may have a small incremental effect on the size of the crop, and twice as much may cause the increment to be more than twice as great, beyond some point, more fertilizer no longer increases the crop in equal proportions, and it is even possible to reduce the crop with excess fertilizer. Economic decision-making within the constraints of a price system with profits and losses seldom leads to production in the region where more input leads to absolutely diminishing output. There is obviously no point spending hard cash for inputs whose incremental effect will be negative. However, this is not to say that such results do not happen when the incentives in the particular decision-making process make it rational for the individual decision-maker, however detrimental it may be to society, which is not a decision-making unit. Internal communication systems in large organizations are often open to many individuals who may wish to send memoranda, announcements, official documents, paychecks, survey questions, or plain gossip. The number and frequency of such internal communications influences how much attention the average recipient pays to each item. Infrequent arrivals of internal mail are likely to receive more attention per unit than a flood of material arriving every few hours. In other words, the law of diminishing returns operates so that beyond some point there are diminishing increments of attention as the quantity of mail increases. With a sufficient inundation, there will be less total attention paid, less information effectively received than if fewer communications had been sent. The situation can reach this level of absolutely diminishing returns only because there are virtually no costs to the numerous individual decision makers who decide whether to add more material to the internal communications system. They may all know that the recipient's attention and patience are already strained, but each individual sender also knows that his action alone will have very little effect on that. As long as it is worth the bother of typing or mimeographing, the sender has every incentive to send, because part of the costs created by his decision will be externalized to others in the form of generally diminished attention. When they all do it, they all lose. But this happens only because all is not the decision-making unit. A more serious social problem arises when whole institutions have incentives to push their activities well past the point of incrementally diminishing returns into the region of absolutely diminished returns. Time. Among the constraints affecting economic trade-offs are those which depend on time. The choice between spending money on entertainment today and using that money to buy seeds to plant apple trees is not only a choice between two different sets of benefits, it is a choice among benefits to be received at two very different times. Other things being equal, the present is always preferred to the future, if only because life itself is uncertain and the future may never come for the individual decision maker. Looked at another way, future benefits must be greater than present benefits to make it worthwhile to wait. There is some level of difference that will make present and future benefits equally valuable to a particular individual at a particular time. How much difference and how much time are matters that vary from person to person and vary incrementally with the same person. To someone dying of thirst, a gallon of water right now might be more valuable than a swimming pool 2 years from now, even though the same person under normal conditions would prefer to wait for the pool. In short, with intertemporal substitutions, as with substitutions at a given time, there is no such thing as the rate of substitution, either in production or consumption. There is also no such thing as the value of a given object, for the time when that object is to be received changes its value. A swimming pool right now would be more valuable than a gallon of water, even to a man dying of thirst. Clearly, then, it is more valuable than a swimming pool 2 years from now. More generally, any given asset is of greater value the sooner it is to be received. The legal right to that asset can be sold for more in the market the sooner it will become available. Apple trees that are half-grown will sell for more than apple trees that were just planted, and apple trees that are fully grown will sell for the highest price of all, even if the only differences among these trees are the times when they were planted, which is to say, the time left before they produce apples. Like so many important economic principles, the discount for time is so simple that it is readily forgotten in the rush of practical decisions or at the sound of heady rhetoric. For example, state and municipal governments in financial distress may unilaterally postpone payment on their bonds, with the assurance that those bonds will later be paid off in full. But even if this promise is carried out to the letter in money terms, the very fact that the bonds are paid off later means that they are not paid off in full. $100 3 years from now is worth nearly $26 less than $100 today, when the interest rate is 8%, and this does not even allow for inflation. In other words, a 3-year postponement is economically the same as a confiscation of about 1/4 the value of the asset, even if there is no inflation. With even mild inflation, it can easily amount to a confiscation of, or default on, 1/3 or more of the total amount entrusted to the government by those who bought its bonds. Merely moving any asset backward and forward in time changes its value substantially. This is demonstrable with economic assets measured in money, but the principle applies far more broadly in social institutions in general. Justice delayed is justice denied is an old legal axiom, and the law's delay is an expression that goes back at least as far as Shakespeare. The dispatch or delay inherent in various institutional processes can be equally or more important than the end result conventionally expressed as if it were a constant value. The popular habit of referring to a fixed dollar amount or a given physical thing or a particular social outcome as if these were also fixed values, without regard to the time involved, means more than intellectual confusion. It means opportunities for rule changes affecting only time to make major arbitrary changes in people's fate. Merely by such apparently innocuous decisions as changing the effective date of a law, modifying the retirement age, or lengthening a waiting period, the government can transfer billions of dollars around the economy, including directing some of it towards itself. Merely by lending to enterprises, including government-run enterprises, at an artificially low interest rate, the cost of their whole operation can be grossly misstated and a venture made to appear to be paying its own way, on paper. The movement of assets through time is a two-way movement. Not only may present benefits be postponed, future benefits may be moved forward into the present, at a discount corresponding to the interest premium paid in market transactions for postponement. An agricultural society can eat up the seeds needed for the next crop, increasing current food consumption at the expense of future food consumption. A nation may reduce its ability to defend itself militarily, thereby gaining additional consumer or governmental spending power in the present at the expense of either higher military expenditures or forced capitulations in the future. The individual may gain in various ways by betraying his pledges and obligations at the expense of lower future benefits from activities requiring credibility. Investment and disinvestment. Moving assets from the future to the present is never costless to the recipient, just as moving assets from the present to the future is never costless to the donor. The process of transforming current assets into future assets is known in economics as investment. However, the process itself extends far beyond financial activities. When someone carefully puts his things away, at home or at work, he is deliberately sacrificing present time that could be used for other activities in order to require less time to find his things again in the future. When someone takes the trouble, and sometimes pain and embarrassment, to make his feelings clear to someone else, it is a deliberate loss of present psychic well-being in order to forestall a greater loss of future psychic well-being through misunderstandings. The purpose is to have a greater net psychic well-being over the relevant time span, just as the purpose of financial investments is to have a greater net worth over some relevant time span. The essential similarity between financial and non-financial investment processes has been noted by such economists as John Stuart Mill in the 19th century and Adam Smith in the 18th century, but it has been only the past generation of economists who have elaborated theories of human capital in its various forms of education, healthcare, migration, and other activities designed to enhance future well-being of either a financial or a psychic nature. So the term disinvestment can also apply to moving assets from the future into the present, without regard to whether financial or psychic assets are involved. Such phrases as burning the candle at both ends, a short life and a merry one, eating up your capital, or living off future generations, all refer to similar processes, although measured in different units. Most expressions describing disinvestment have pejorative connotations, but there is nothing intrinsically wrong with a 90-year-old man's selling some of his half-grown apple trees to pay for current expenditures on things to promote his present health, comfort, and happiness. To try to hold the trees until maturity might make less sense. Disinvestments made by a given decision-maker for himself must be distinguished from disinvestments made for him by others. The legal system provides safeguards against private individuals disinvesting someone else's assets. However, there is no legal protection against the government itself doing the same thing. For example, government's inflationary policies may disinvest part of any financial assets set aside for one's old age, leaving less future real assets in the hands of the individual who saved them and putting more present real assets in the hands of the government that issues the inflated currency. The transfer is no less real for having been implicit and therefore not subject to constitutional limitations on confiscation of property without due process of law. Probably more assets have been confiscated this way than by the exercise of government's right of eminent domain under constitutional guarantees. Nor are those who have lost their savings predominantly wealthy people with large bank accounts or stocks and bonds. Much saving takes place in forms not usually thought of as savings, life insurance and employee pension funds, for example. Through pension funds, American workers own a higher percentage of the total industrial assets of the United States than do workers in an avowedly communist nation like Yugoslavia. The confiscation of employee pension fund assets through inflation is not so much a redistribution from one income class to another as it is a redistribution from the pensioner's future assets to the government's present assets. Risk. The element of time introduces the element of risk. Perhaps the most fundamental risk is that we may not live through the time required to see a given economic activity concluded and remunerated. Many other risks exist, of partial or total loss of whatever is invested, or even losses extending beyond.
Taigi, sveiki. Šiandien atliksime paskutinę slyvos E39 BMW 525 reiso kelionę, kurią aš apturėsiu su šitą mašinėlę prieš atiduodamas ją savo sesiai. O seseris negali dar jos vairuoti, tad vairuos jos Japakas, Hakalis, kuris su 2 štukių alga pusę metų taupusi ant mašinos už 5K. Taigi, anyway, tikslas yra parodyti, koks yra mašinos garsas, koks yra mašinos vairavimas ir šiaip visas drivo pojūtis ir vat, tokia ta situacija pas mus čia. Apeinam, pasižiūrim šitą slyvutę mes. Graži slyvutė. Lieka X man, jeigu Dievas duos sveikatos ir ryžto ir kantrybės. Kitais metais jį perleisim sesiai, o patys pasiimsim antrą X-ą. Taigi. O, ir mama kažką pamiršo. Nu. Ką pamiršai? Jo, ne. Gerai. Tai ką, dar trumpas slyvutės apėjimas. Sies pavešiu. Sies pavešiu. Nu tai ko tu čia maivais dabar?
Aš neskubu.
Nu tai aš skubu, sies pavešiu. Taip. Žiūrėsim, kaip čia mūsų.
Tu jau čia viską ištrausiai, ale?
Ale. Kaip man taip nehitrai gaunasi šitą kamerą? Aš nesuprantu. Todėl, kad niekaip aš jos neįstatau normaliu kampu, kaip man reikia.
Aš galvoju, gal šiandien nežinau, kaip tu ten man sakei, įgarsinimą telefoną padarysiu. Nu, vadai, čia nevistai.
Na.
Tu čia montuoji tą kamerą?
Jo.
Kodėl tu jos čia nori?
Nu, noriu. Kodėl noriu? Noriu ir tiek, blė, bet aš jeigu per ją pavėluosiu, ne? Tai aš neturiu ką pasakyti. Supranti, mam, aš kai darau savo dalykus, jie nėra, nu kaip, ne tai kad paprasti dalykai, bet ta prasme, aš darau ir aš jau ten turiu be klaidų daryti ir bet kokie Andriau.
Aš žinau, kad pas tave visi tokie darbai.
Andriau, ana, nu negaliu aš.
Ir tvarkyti, nekėdėti.
Kaip aš anąkart buvau įstatęs ir aš dabar, blėt, negaliu įstatyti. Aš man nebešunta. Nahui. Kaip aš anąkart buvau įstatęs ir dabar, blėt, aš negaliu įstatyti. Nu.
Parašyta, kad mūsų pagrindinė diagnozė tau ūlinė cista.
Ir ką tai turi sakyti?
Nu kažkoks tai kaulas randėjęs.
Tai. Einam nahui, короче, заеб. Viskas.
Turi pasą savo, viską pasiėmė. Dokumentus. Nes ten, jeigu paprašys.
Kas čia?
Spėsi, visą valandą. Nu, aišku.
Bet čia, blėt, aš jau prieš 20 minučių norėjau ramiai išvažiuoti.
Suspėsi, žiūri.
Ate. kokie?
5 variklis.
Gerai.
Kurią valandą turėjot?
13:51.
Jūs čia į darbą?
Ne, čia šiaip atostogoms, bet
Aha, Zubiela.
13:51?
Andrius Zubiela, tai.
Negali būti.
Negerai gal laiką pasakyti, gal negerai pasakė.
Tai tada greitas, jeigu 13:50.
Ne, tai buvo užregistruota tarptautinė.
Laiką parodykit, žinot.
Tiksliai, negeras laikas neranda.
COVID-19 atsiverskit ir žiūrėkit, kur tą laiką jums paskyrė.
Tuo jau.
Aha, kovidas.
Tuoj palaukite.
Čia va štai gale.
Rugsėjo 13.
Aha,
13:45.
Aha, tai labai svarbu.
O man kompiuterį 13:51 rodė.
Tai žiūrėkit,
45.
Taip.
Zubiela Andrius.
Taip, tas pats.
Aš jau vis.
Zubiela Andrius yra PGR'as.
Tai čia ta.
Koda. Nosis ir gerklė.
Gerai, 385-1201, 1183.
Labai gerai.
Dabar žiūrėkite, o kokia sistema su šitu dabar testu man...
Gausit žinutę per 24 valandas.
O kaip dėl... O angliškas vertimą pats reikės pasidaryti pačiam?
Pačiam.
Ar užskaitys man tą anglišką vertimą?
Nieko nežinom. Ar angliškas, ar vokiškas, jūs klausit, ar aš
Bet čia yra pagrindinė vieta šitam tikslui.
Mums nieko šito nesako. Mes tik paimam, prašom atsakymą.
Vežam, mes ten vežam, tas testas atėjo.
Vienu žodžiu, atsakingų nėra.
Nėra. O Jėzus, tai čia darau. Ne tą. Čia burna. O, tai ne taip padariau.
Nieko tokio.
Gerai,
Jūsų darbas paims.
biškį dabar nuskytę, pirmiausia, o paskui ten.
Ten užsienį, tai
Ne, biškį burnytę dabar. Neskana. Viskas dabar.
Tai sakote per 24 valandas.
rytoj gausit žinutę.
Dabar darbovietė man šitą apmoką irgi nežinote, ar kaip čia skaitysis?
Jūs dirbantis Lietuvoje?
Tai žinoma.
Dėl darot, todėl kad turit simptomų jaučiate, ne?
Ne, dėl to, kad ketinu keliauti į užsienį, reikia šito dalyko.
Be pagaro nekeliausit, jo.
Tai va, ir...
Ir rytoj gausit ir keliausit.
Puiku, ačiū Jums tada labai, viskas čia būtų šiam momentui,
Tai
taip?
jeigu jau norit jūs pažymos,
Taip,
jeigu pas mus deklaruotas,
ne. Kaišiadorių rajonas.
Kaišiadorių, tai va matot, mes turim savuosius, tai skambina į mūsų kasą numerį iš Kaišiadorių, tai Kaišiadoryse teiraukitės. Sakykit, aš padariau PGR ir man pažymą reikia.
Jie matys susinchronizuotus sveikatoj duomenis.
Nu, turėtų, taip.
Aš jums galiu duoti va, tą numerį ir pasiskambinti. Va, užsirašykit 8349. Ir sakykit, kad jūs Kaišiadoryse.
Tuoj, sekundę.
Pas mus jau mašinos.
Suprantama. 8349,
Aha, 5,
taip,
11,
taip,
06.
6. Bet kokiu atveju aš elektroninį paštą gausiu testo...
Vyktai rytoj, bet šito numerį galit skambtelėti ir pasakyti, aš norėčiau išvykti į užsienį dėl pažymos. Sakykit, o aš tyrimą padariau, kad rytoj tik gausiu 24 valandas.
Supratau.
Tai va, ką jie pasakė, bet sakykit, registruotas Kaišiadoryse.
Gerai, ačiū Jums labai.
Kad jie ruoštų pažymą, prašau.
Viso. filmuoja, ne? Važiuojam, žinai, pralenkiai, žinai, aplenkiai. Ok, aplenkiai, kažkur artimiausiai stoteliai leidai man vėl apvažiuoti, žinai. Nu, ta prasme. Bet labai daug manevrų nedarom, kad nebūtų.
Oi, ne, reikėjo. Per langą iškišk, bus kokybė kitokia.
Blet, palauk.
Bulvinis lekia. Sakės, tai visą filmą, suka. Ką tu galvoji, žmonės galvoja?
Galvoju, kazolas.
Važiuok, blet, važiuok. Kuro, kai
Supis.
Kaip tu filmuoji, na?
Bus blogai.
Nežinau, nepasiemai taip. Žiūrė, lenks, davai. Davai, lenk. Lenk. Aš tik gebėjau automatą, čia šerdamas čia. Nu, hau, tai dar įmanoma? Įmanoma. Viso mano buvo. Matai mano mamą? Matai mano mamą? Ну-ка, то. Нет, это уже малон, вот, смотрите,
Paeikit biškį dar iš šoną. Egi, paeikit biškį dar iš šoną. Gerai. Nu ką, reikia greitai apžvalgą padaryti. Sio, reikia dabar. Ką? Vaidai dar vėl paprašysiu biškį pafilmuoti. Tai dabar žinai kaip reikės? Tu prieik, aš ant tavęs pasižiūrėsiu ir tada tau paaiškinsiu. Tarkim, jeigu tu va prie mašinos atsistok va čia va. Atsistok prie mašinos ir atsistok į mane. Tipo čia aš tu. Nu, dar arčiau mašinos, arčiau. Tarkim mane, nors gal geriau va, tu atsistok. Jo, tu atsistok, o tu ateik Vaidai pasižiūrėti. Nu jo, tai va, maždaug va taip va, kad visą laiką aš būčiau maždaug va, jeigu išorė mašinos, ne, tai pilnų ūgio, ne? Arba pilnų ūgių, arba va maždaug, va jo, iki pilvo, ne? O jeigu lendu kur į mašiną, tai arčiau va prieini ir maždaug, kad aš matyčiaus ir visien mašiną, ne? Ir aš čia kažką rodysiu, čia kažką tipo bandysiu pašnekėti.
Ir rodyk, kad ir tave, ir mašiną matyti.
Jo.
Gerai. Čia jau filmuoja, reikia iš naujo, ne? Ar palik? Ai. Tai čia palik čia tai jau. Gerai. Tai įsikarpys juk, ne?
Ką?
Įsikarpys turbūt.
Jo.
Bet gerai, užtenka drų prikirpsi. Kai kuriuos.
Gerai, čia biškė.
Išsijungia.
Ne, pirštukus pastilk pamatyti ekraną.
Gerai.
Rodo, ne? Ok. Ura, palauk, kaip čia pradėti, gerai.
Nu, rusiškai.
Taigi, sveiki atvykę į pirmąjį Darto seksisto BMSų apžvalgos epizodą. Ir už manęs matote klasikinę slyvą E39, 21 metų, 525. 525, 120 kW, stokas nečiupuota. Šitą mašinėlę paturėjom 3 metus, per 3 metus sumynėm 50 000 kilometrų. Ir, ką žinau, galiu pasakyti, kad kokia geriausia mašina, kokį iš esmės kada nors esu turėjęs. Truputėlį apeisim, apžvelgsim įdomesnės ar kažkokias tai klasikiškesnės vietas šitos mašinos, bet gal pirmą pradėsim nuo tokios teorinės įžangos apie šitas mašinas, kad ne veltui atvažiavom į šitą vietą, kur sukasi vadinamieji žaliosios energijos malūnai. Ir, mėlėjai, galiu jums pasakyti tik tai, kad chuinia visa šita yra. Chuinia šita visa yra. Per 10 metų uždraus mums šitas visas mašinas dizelio vidinio vidaus degimo variklio ir turėsim mokėti 4-5 kartus už brangesnę elektrą, už pačią mašiną, kurie bytelnai. Neleis niekas mums lakstyti, kaip mes norim iš esmės, ir dar visas dalykas galiausiai bus sekiamas. Tai, kaip ir, nežinau, daug skirtingų apžvalgininkų šitą mašiną irgi yra įvardinę kaip paskutinę kartą dar tų rimtų karinių BMW, kurie yra labai ekonomiški, galingi ir ypač patvarus. Aišku, E39 nelabai išsiskiria savo korozijos atsparumu, tačiau, nepaisant to, 21 metų mašina, stokų juoda, turinti daug korozijos židinių, šiuo atveju, man atrodo, dar neatrodo apgailėtinai ir iš tikrųjų turi šiokio tokio iššaukiančio temperamento. Taigi, prieikime iš arčiau, pasižiūrėsime, kasgi toje mašinoje. Su mašina greitų metu atsisveikinsiu, perleisiu savo sesei. Sesė neturi teisų, tai vairuos jos hakalis, kuris, manau, realiai jam per gera šita mašina yra. Nu, bet pasižiūrėkime tą būklę, kokia ji yra prieš atiduodant. Nes, man atrodo, per metus šita būklė bus ahujenai blogesnė. Gerai, užsukime į bagažinę pažiūrėti, 500, kaip sako, litrų. Su subuku ir ženkliuku. Šiek tiek parfumerijos ir visokios kitos chuinios, kurios gali prireikti įvairiausiais gyvenimo atvejais. Zapaskė. Nu, dabar jau neparodysim, bet jinai yra. Vienu žodžiu. Vienintelis minusas, turbūt, kad nėra kablio. Nu ir gal, aišku, man, kaip jau senesniam dėdui, zaibys būtų universalas. Tai va, tai galim pabandyti sėsti į galinę sėdynę, pasižiūrėti, kiek šitos vietos yra. Iš esmės tikrai beveik limuzino klasės automobilis. Jame apstu vietos, 5 žmonės be jokių problemų gali susėsti. Ir visas gengas gali varyti į svetimą miestelį, duoti pizdailocham. Arba kartu važiuoti į meilės festivalį. Jokio kurvos skirtumo. Šoferio pozicija pati patogiausia, kaip ir minėjau, išskirtinė šiuo atveju. Na, aš gal kažkiek ne pagal reikalavimus ją esu įsipatoginęs, bet iš esmės viskas čia zaibys, panelė į vairuotojo atsukta, panelės ir viso interjero medžiagos yra geros, belenkė geros, bet manai visi ir kurva lavonai šiti už 2005 metų, man atrodo, interjero medžiagų kokybė negali lygintis, apie Simerus negaliu kalbėti, bet visa kita, kas vėliau, man asmeniškai jaučmo. Tai va, tai tokis dalykėlis. Kągi mes dar galim pažiūrėti po variklių. Tai yra po variklio dangčių. Pasižiūrėkime po variklio dangčių. Tai kaip ir minėta, 525 D, 120 kW. Ponas elektrikas Kazys buvo užturbinęs iki 135, bet prieš technikinę vis dėlto reikėjo sumažinti šitą galę. Nu ir didelių esminių problemų nebuvo. Nu, tokia bazinė statistika, tai iš esmės biškį apsipisau pirkdamas keliais šimtais. Nusipirkau štuką 7, manau štuką 5 turėjo jinai kainuoti 2019 vasarį. Nuo to laiko iki dabar kaina, sakyčiau, parkrito kokių 3-4 procentų, bet pagal autopliuso kainų kreivės pastarojo dešimtmečio bėgyje slyvų kaina nustojo kristi. Ir aš taip įsivaizduoju, kas turi 3 litrinius, dabokit ir ačiū bus zaibys mašina kolekcinė kažkada vėliau. Tai net nežinau, ką čia dar daugiau pasakyti. Zaibys su ją lakstyti. Tai va, ir svarbiausia tai daryti saugiai. Dėkui už pirmą Darto seksisto Bemso apžvalgos epizodą. Laukite kitų dalių. Viskas. Dėkui labai.